Good day, everyone. Today we're going to continue with our class on persuasive writing. Previously, we looked at what is persuasive writing. We established that persuasive writing is a type of writing where you try to persuade others to hold your opinion or accept a certain ideology that you may have using both factual information and your opinion. Now, we established that the aim of a persuasive piece is to persuade. We established that the audience that we would usually try to persuade would be the audience who is generally not having the same opinion or does not have the same concept or the same belief as you do. You're targeting the opposer when you are writing a persuasive piece. Now, with that target, there are certain ways in which you can encourage someone to hold your opinion, and we call these persuasive techniques. So today's class is all about persuasive techniques. We established that in your persuasive essays, you will look at a 5-paragraph structure, much like what we learned in expository writing. We already established that for your pre-writing process, you will research information on the topic that you're looking at. If you have to narrow your topic, you do so by establishing a particular demographic that you're going to be talking about, a particular issue that you're going to talk about, and 3 main points that support your stance on the topic. When you have researched this information, you will then categorize the information, whether it be political, educational, social, religious, whatever, and then you will organize these in a sequence of less severe to most severe so that your essay can have a build-up. After you're finished doing this, it is safe to say that we now have our topic researched, information about the topic, our background information and contextualizing about how we're going to broach the topic to our audience, which would be the opposers, as well as a clear thesis statement on the topic we're going to discuss paragraph by paragraph. And you list these topics in a manner in which they'll be developed, which is, as we said, from least severe to most severe. When you get to the body of your essay, you're going to have to use persuasive techniques to appeal to your opposing audience. These persuasive techniques are listed based on the 3 pillars of persuasive writing or persuasive techniques. This is the ethos, the logos, and the pathos. When we looked at what builds rhetoric, I explained that ethos is the authority. It is who says what, the experts, the people who give credibility to your argument. The logos is the research data. Now, when I say research data, I mean scientifically researched data. Now, when you're doing different types of research, you will learn about the scientific method. The scientific method is where you allow something to follow a particular process, and this process should be able to be replicated regardless of place, person, etc., and it will yield the same results. These would be facts. Now, we spoke about objective facts and subjective facts, and then we spoke about bias. Objective facts would be those facts that follow the scientific method where the results will be the same every time once the method is followed. The subjective facts will be those facts that are based on manipulated variables. So something that is relevant to Vincentians may not be relevant to Bajans or Trinidadians or Americans because the variables are different. So we have the logos. Now we have the pathos, which deals with the feeling part of it. Because whether we want to admit it or not, a man convinced against his will holds his opinion still. So it is important that we appeal to people's feelings. Now let's get into the techniques, because today we're going to learn some popular persuasive techniques as well as understand their uses, and then we're going to choose 3 that are applicable to our particular topic that we have chosen while we're doing our pre-writing process. So we're going to start with the ethos, which is the authority. Now, there are different ways that you can appeal to somebody's sense of credibility or their sense of understanding through credibility, which is one, reputable names. Now, I would have mentioned this as expert opinions, but you don't always have to use an expert opinion. Sometimes reputable names are enough to persuade somebody. When I say reputable, for me, a reputable individual may be somebody who is a scientist or somebody who is an expert. They have years of experience. For someone else, a reputable source can be a movie star. And this is why you would often hear doctors recommend. Okay, who are the doctors? Doctors there simply represent reputable authority, right? Celebrities. That's another way that you appeal to people by using reputable names. Or you can say the prime minister, or you can say the minister. Most times you would see this is a technique being used commonly in our day-to-day lives, where we call it name dropping. Where somebody has an opinion about a policy, or they have an opinion about a way in which something should be done, and they'll say, oh, the director said, or the director would be upset, and they use that name there to persuade you to think, well, oh, I have to follow this thing. So that's an example of reputable names. So if you're writing something about education, you can go down the logical route and you use experts in the form of, let's say you're talking about linguistics and you mention the name Noam Chomsky. Everybody knows Noam Chomsky as a reputable linguist. You may mention Dennis Craig or some other linguist, Kamal Brathwaite or something, and you may use the expert name. But when you're looking at ethos, it doesn't always come from an expert. It is best if it comes from an expert, but sometimes, let's say if you're going to write a persuasive piece on why Crocs are better than Rastaman slippers, you may say even Kanye West wears Crocs, and Kanye West would be a reputable name in fashion. Another way that we can appeal to people's sense of persuasion or credibility is by using the bandwagon effect. So bandwagon here means that we use words that show where it is common or popular, right? So most people in St. Vincent eat burjal on a Friday. That's not true, but we use that bandwagon effect for individuals who are susceptible to being persuaded based on majority. We use the bandwagon effect because it puts them in a majority bracket. So you can use the bandwagon using words like most people, or you can say everyone knows, those sorts of words. And this is also included in generalizations. So generalizations would be all girls love pink. That's not true, but it's a generalization because majority of ladies will often say, or majority of girls will often say, their favorite color is pink. That's not saying every girl's favorite color is pink, but when you generalize, you put them in a majority bracket, and some people will be persuaded simply for the majority. Another technique are third-person pronouns. Again, it appeals to authority. Third-person pronouns such as, we all know that girls love the color pink, right? Or Vincentians love to party, right? So when we use those third-person pronouns like we and us, it puts the person in the same bracket as you. So they are more persuaded to hold your opinion because you have established some sort of similarity. Now, what these are doing is simply working against popular biases that people have. For example, reputable names is creating a bias called the halo effect. You're more likely to believe something if you feel attached or if you feel an affinity towards the person, right? When you're talking about third-person plural pronouns, you're talking about the majority, right? The bandwagon effect. So these would take care of your credibility. appealing to somebody's sense of authority so that they can feel as if making this decision would put me in that same bracket of authority, or I am making a good decision because so many people who I respect and admire also hold the same opinion. Now let's look at logos. Logos, as you know, are those facts. So they deal with factual information such as data. Data that you get from a survey, data from a questionnaire, data from a census, data from a study, data. Statistics are also part of that data. So using numbers like 23%, 5 out of every 10, and so on. Research or case study. So if, for example, if you're looking at education and you talk about a case study, teachers usually have to do a portfolio to show their case study of their action research, where they'll say, I used this technique and it worked because based on the statistics of the students' grades, I can see an improvement in this area and that area based on the students that I studied. So case study. We have survey, and then we also have experts, and I explained to you where reputable names does not always have to be experts, but when you're looking at the logical, it always has to be experts. It has to be someone learned, it has to be someone authorized, it has to be an organization that is authorized, it has to be someone with a level of credibility. That is why we may quickly believe BBC News over One News or Eyewitness or whatever, because BBC has a whole system of journalism as opposed to one individual from one perspective that's building up that credibility. That's not to say that news is wrong, because most times I prefer, those small independent journalists to the large companies that tend to push an agenda. But that's my personal opinion. You don't have to hold that opinion. I'm not an expert in journalism. Then we have examples. So when I say examples, I want to specify the types of examples, compare and contrast examples. So if I want to talk about why you should purchase a sneakers for $300 versus a Crocs for $300, that's my opinion, I may say, look at the versatility of a sneaker. You can wear it to school, you can wear it to town, you can wear it at home, you can exercise in it. When you buy a Crocs, you can only wear it one place, somewhere casual. Okay? So I compare and I contrast. When you're doing demos, I'm going for cause and effect. So the demo would be explaining the process of something and showing the cause versus the effect of the thing. Right? So when I say cause and effect demo, I am not going to give just a random story. I'm going to give a story that shows a cause of something and then an effect. So I am demonstrating why sneakers are more practical than Crocs. So I may talk about the fact that sneakers have a no-slip grip sole and they are more durable. So I can demonstrate where someone wears a Crocs, there's a slippery wet area, and because it doesn't have a no-slip grip sole, the person may fall and break the hip. That is a demonstration of a cause and an effect. The cause is poor choice in shoes, the effect, a broken hip. So demonstrations are good when you're showing logical facts, but it has to be a logical demonstration. Okay. Then we have rhetorical questions. So I'm going to leave rhetorical questions for last because, as you can see, I have a list of other questions here. And it is important for us to know the difference between rhetorical questions and other types of questions. And yes, there are lots of questions. There are over 15 specific questions that you can use in persuasion alone in different areas of persuasion, whether it be advertising, etc. So rhetorical questions I would leave for last. Let's move on to pathos, feelings. How do I appeal to people's feelings? Well, I can use emotive language. So emotive language would be what we call suggestive language. So when you say that something is disgusting, that's a very strong emotion there, right? You can offend somebody by saying something is disgusting. But if the effect that you're looking for is disgust, then you can go ahead and use that word disgusting. If you're looking for a more diplomatic effect, you can choose a different word. You can say not preferred, right? So I can say wearing a Crocs to a business meeting is not preferred. But you can wear a sneakers and still pull it off depending on how you attire. That is understandable. You won't say wearing a Crocs is disgusting to a meeting. Or wearing a Crocs to a meeting is disgusting. It's strong. It can turn off your reader, especially if they like Crocs. But let's say, for example, we're looking at a topic for, like, example, crime in St. Vincent. And I can say, well, the quality of crime or the types of crime are disgusting and heinous in St. Vincent. That's the effect that I want to convey. I want to convey total disgust. So I can go ahead and I can use that language and convey that emotion. So that's what we mean by emotive language. Be very careful with strong language because it can actually do the opposite of what you're trying to do, which is turn off the person because they may feel judged, they may feel badgered, they may feel attacked, which is not very good for persuading. But if you really want to convey that level of disgust because you believe that this emotion will drive home your point, then by all means, go in on it. But remember, we do so respectfully. We don't bash the audience. We don't vilify. We don't abase. Empathy. Empathy will be the opposite of the suggestive language, where you try to create a sense of compassion in a person, right? So you can say, I know that quitting smoking is difficult, but with support, it is possible. So you appeal to the person's weakness, you have compassion, you have sensitivity, and then you drive forward your point that you can achieve whatever, or you can change. That would be empathy. Sensory imagery has to be used sparingly because sensory imagery, as we learned it in creative language, is about the imagination. But we don't really want imagination to an extent in persuasive. But imagination is sometimes possible. So for example, let's say I'm talking about wearing a Crocs to a meeting, right? I can describe. Imagine that you are wearing an expensive Armani suit and you are smelling very rich in your $300 perfume. And then when they look at your feet, you're wearing a Crocs. It's underwhelming. That is giving them sensory imagery. They're seeing the picture before them and they're understanding why this particular picture may not fit. And so it can persuade them to have a different perspective. Anecdotes or stories. Anecdotes are small, relevant, concise, and cohesive stories. You don't go on and on and on, but you may give a small story. For example, I saw a woman at the bus stop. She had a baby, the rain was falling, and the van just pulled up and they did not even help her with the baby bag or anything. And this goes to show the quality of customer service in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that even the bus drivers and the van conductors have no regard or concern for even the smallest human being and a struggling mother. That's not the case though, because I traveled in public transport and I would say the conductors were very helpful to the mummies. So don't get carried away with that story. I just gave an example. Hypotheticals are also stories, but these are futuristic stories. So you can describe a situation, Imagine there is a school in St. Vincent and the Grenadines where you can get quality education, but you can also incorporate fun learning activities that appeal to students, and all of the students pass CSEC and have a strong sense of self so that when they go into the workplace, they're not insecure and laden with all sorts of cognitive issues or psychological issues. That's a hypothetical situation. It's futuristic. You give them a vision to work to. And then lastly, for feelings, we have hyperbole, which is exaggerating, as we learned it in creative writing. Exaggerating what? Exaggerating whatever. Exaggerating your opinion, exaggerating the effect, exaggerating a cause, just exaggerating. But be careful with the exaggerations, because too much exaggerations will make your stuff seem incredulous. Right? Like, I can't believe anything they're saying because everything is worst case scenario. We see this a lot in political debates. It's always the worst. Labour is always the worst, NDP is always the worst, and nobody is trying to see any positives or negatives and have a balanced argument. Everything looks biased because everything is hyperbolized, everything is exaggerated. Now, I told you that I was going to leave this section on questions for last, and I wanted to specify specifically what are rhetorical questions. Now, rhetorical questions are actually statements of fact that are posited in an interrogative format that includes your opinion. So I'm going to take that back. Rhetorical question is actually a statement. Now, when you learned about different types of sentences, you learned about interrogative, declarative, command, exclamatory, all of those. I am telling you, a rhetorical question is, most times when I ask what's a rhetorical question, people say a question that don't require an answer. That is not completely true. Why does it not require an answer? It does not require an answer because it's not interrogating. It is not requiring information of you because the question itself is already packed and packaged with the information. But they're putting the information in a question format. Along with the information, there is your opinion pushed in there. So with your opinion and with the fact, it's actually a factual statement backed with your opinion, or opinionated statement backed by fact. But they're asking the question so that the individual feels as though the thought came out of their head. Because naturally, when you put something in a question format, questions are known by your tone. So sometimes in class, I'll ask a child a question, and the child will give me a response. So I'll say 2 + 2, and the child will say 4. And I will say, are you asking me or are you telling me? Right? Now, that's a statement. 4 is the answer. But because of the tone, I don't know whether you really know or not. So when you put a statement and an opinion together and you put it in a question tone, in a question structure, it makes the person think. But what they're thinking about is actually the information that you have embedded into the question. And that's the mechanics of a rhetorical question. So I have a little triangle here. Fact and opinion come together, gives you a rhetorical question. So a rhetorical question would be, with all the added benefits of eating green, organic, nutritious foods, isn't it wise for you to change your diet? Now, you're not going to say no because you're going to say, well, I don't want the benefits of organic, nutritious foods. So you're going to question that. Now, that type of question can quickly get mistaken with a loaded question. Now, a loaded question is where you have false truths and opinions in the question that you're actually trying to extract from the individuals. And you would find these loaded questions a lot in the court of law. Lawyers and commerce people use them a lot. So they will not ask you a question just to ask a question. They'll ask you a question that implies something, right? So they will say something like, you went park yesterday, wasn't home, right? So the false truth may be the fact that you went to the park with their opinion, right? That you were not home. They're asking you if you were home and insinuating that you were not at home because you went to the park, right? So they'll say something like, in the court of law, they can ask something like, so when you beat your wife, do you usually use blunt objects? Now that is asking the person, do you beat your wife? But instead of saying, do you beat your wife with blunt objects, or do you even beat your wife, they will say, when you beat your wife, do you use blunt objects? Now, when you beat your wife, that is a false truth. You have no fact of that. That was not stated before. And then you put in your opinion as in, well, I think he used blunt objects. Do you? So those loaded questions need to be very careful. I don't want to use a loaded question because remember, loaded question has false truths. So if you're talking about politics, you can say, after the government steals all this money, who is going to pay back this loan? You cannot say that because there is no proof to show embezzlement or misuse of funds or whatever. So you can get yourself in trouble for that. So be very careful with loaded questions. Loaded questions are actually there to catch somebody in a false truth that you assume to be accurate. Do not confuse loaded questions and rhetorical questions with leading questions. Now, leading questions are excellent for advertisements. So you would usually hear the infomercials this start. Have you tried every diet and can't lose weight? Are you tired of spending money on pills and potions that show no results? Do you want a healthy... So it keeps going on and on, these questions and questions and questions. These leading questions are not useful in argument or persuasive writing because your audience is already against your opinion. And then you're asking them questions. They're going to have enough of it. It's like, tell me what you're telling me and let me get to it because I already have my opinion. Okay? So whereas loaded questions, though they can be slightly structured like a rhetorical question, they are not factual. Rhetorical questions always include factual information, objective facts. These loaded questions usually have opinions modeled up in statements that look like truths that you're trying to extract from the person. And the leading questions are just questions that just keep going on and on and on. Now, leading questions are much like polar questions or closed questions. Stay away from polar questions or closed questions. These questions require a yes or no answer. So if you were having a political debate and you say, do you think that this government is incompetent? Everybody gonna say either no, yes, no. And they're gonna forget about everything that you have to say because that's the opinion that I have and I'm going with that. If you're trying to persuade somebody of something, the last thing you want to do is make them feel reinforced or justified in their false opinion. So these polar questions, these yes or no questions, are actually harming your argument because it shuts off the person's thinking capacity. Whereas the rhetorical question presents you with a fact that you cannot refute and an opinion that is the most logical opinion based on that fact and allows the person to have critical thinking based on awareness, critical thinking and awareness. These closed questions actually reinforce closed-mindedness and shuts down critical thinking. And the last question are funnel questions, which are much like leading questions. Even though these funnel questions are very important for you as an individual to develop your argument, where you start with a broad idea. It's sort of like deductive reasoning. So you start with a generalization, right? So is discrimination right? No. Why is it not right? Well, it makes people feel bad. How do people feel bad? They feel bad when they don't feel validated. What makes someone feel validated? Well, they feel that they can voice their opinion without judgment. They don't feel threatened in an environment. They feel like an equal, like they're included. And then you lead all those questions until you come up with your argument. These are great for brainstorming, But you don't want to have to take somebody through that process in your argument, because much like the leading questions that keep going on and on and on, they're going to keep your reader going on and on and on, or they're going to keep your audience going on and on and on with no guarantee that at the end of this argument, they're going to hold your opinion. Because I would have asked people questions, let's say, everybody does it. Everyone does it in discussion. It's a very common thing. That's how discussions happen. We ask questions. So you may have a conversation, a very common conversation that's happening right now is male roles versus female roles versus transgenderism and so on. So you have the argument as, do you think a woman should be able to do this? Why do you think she should be able to do this? Why is it important? And even though they'll have credible answers as to why a woman should do this or why a man should do this and why this is important, that is important, somebody else will come and say, yes, but man's supposed to do that too and woman's supposed to do that too and we're supposed to. So even though there is a logical development of a credible fact, there is no guarantee that people are going to feel inclined. So that's why I would always say, whenever you're using questions in your argument, use maximum 2 rhetorical questions. But if you can use 1 in 1 paragraph, that would be perfect. And I would usually say, use this rhetorical question in your counter argument. Why? Because it allows you to give the factual information that reinforces your point, but also the opinion that undermines the opposing argument. That is the most strategic way in which I see rhetorical questions being used. You can choose any of these wonderful techniques to be used in any of your other paragraphs, but when it comes to your counter argument, I think it is best reinforced using the rhetorical questions, and be very careful not to do any of these other questions in your attempt to create your rhetorical question. If you can create your rhetorical question in your brainstorming process, so you have it rest down there for when you're ready to use it, that would be excellent. So just a quick recap, we were looking at persuasive techniques that are used in persuasive writing. We established that the persuasive techniques can be categorized in the 3 pillars of persuasion, which is the ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos being the authority, as in who can you use to vie and vouch for your opinion. You can use reputable names, and reputable names depend on the reputation of the individual and the topic in which that person is applicable. So in some instances, it can be a celebrity. In some instances, it can be a doctor. In some instances, it can be a mother. Okay? Bandwagon, creating inclusivity in a group. Generalization, making people believe that something that is common is factual. And throughout. Third person pronouns, using we, using us, creates that inclusivity with the audience. Logos, we use facts, facts in data, facts in statistics, research case studies, surveys, experts in the fields, which may be doctors, which may be institutions that are known for having this particular advancement, certain individuals who are well spoken, well read, well learned in their field, etc. We have examples where we can compare and contrast. We can show where one thing is impractical, one thing is practical. We can also have demonstrations in the form of cause and effect. This happened because we did this, so it's logical not to do that thing. And then we have rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are actually statements of fact with your opinion embedded in an interrogative format, not to be confused with loaded questions that are just false truths and your opinions being used to try to extract information from the audience, or leading questions that are questions that follow up on and on and on, or polar questions or closed questions which are yes or no, and funnel questions, which are questions that do develop logical thinking, but because they require so much thinking that the person may not be open to having, they just become disinterested. Pathos appeals to the feelings because it is important for people to feel their feelings, to feel validated, and feelings help you to be convinced of an opinion. A man convinced against his will holds his opinion still. So we use emotive language. Sometimes strong language is necessary, and we can use those strong language to convey that particular tone, to convey that particular feeling. So if you think something is disgusting, whereas you may say wearing a blue tie with a red suit is disgusting, somebody who likes colors may be very offended by that and may not even want to hear anything that you have to say. That may be a harsh word. That emotion might be too harsh. But let's say you're talking about pedophilia and you want to convey that strong emotion. By all means, go ahead and use the word disgusting because it is applicable, it is necessary in that context. On the opposite spectrum, sometimes we need to have compassion. Sometimes we need to use soft words. Sometimes we need to appeal to people's feelings and sensitivities, and we need to express that sympathy in order to get them convinced and persuaded. So appealing to somebody who is trying to change their diet, you can say, I know eating vegetables may not always be tasty, but over time you will develop the palate that makes these foods tasty, just like cake and pizza. And that's the truth. Sensory imagery is very good when you're trying to create a vision for people, right? So you can use sensory imagery if you're talking about a hypothetical situation or you're using an anecdote, which is a short story, to convey your message. Hyperbole is also a method that is used where you exaggerate things. Be very careful with how you use hyperbole. Use it sparingly because you don't want to come across fanatical and biased in your persuasion. And these are the persuasive techniques that we're going to use. Choose the 3 that you love and incorporate them in your brainstorming so that you can have the techniques, you can have the phrases, you can have the particular instance where you're going to use these techniques to make your persuasion most effective. Do not wait until you're in the body of the essay then to think, which persuasive technique should I use? Which persuasive technique would work best with this point? How can I incorporate this? How am I going to structure this emotive language? How am I going to get the statistics that are needed? Whose name am I going to use? Do not wait until you're writing the essay to have these things. Have them in the brainstorming process so when you're writing your essay, everything flows. I hope this class was informative and I will see you next time. Have a good one.